everybody. Welcome to those who just joined us. We are just waiting another minute or two for others to join, and then we'll get started. With me today are Ming Chang and Zoe, who are other members of the Spark Prep team, and they'll be taking questions. We'll all be taking questions at the end through the Q&A feature. So I'll say this again, but there's a button that says Q&A where you can type in your questions as they come up, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible at the end. Great, and we'll just wait another moment or two. Hi all, welcome. Welcome, welcome. We're just waiting another moment for those to join us, and then we'll get started.
Nhưng mà nó không đánh.
Okay, I think we'll get started, and others will join us as they do. So first of all, thank you all so much for being here today and this evening with us. I'm joined by my Spark Prep team, Ming Chang, Zoe, Sa, and Ngap. And for those who have yet to hear this, there is a Q&A button as part of your Zoom window. Feel free to type into that chat as we go, and we'll have some time at the end to answer some questions. So welcome, my name is Cori Marquis. I am the Director of Academic Programming for Spark Prep. And we're hoping that today gives those of you, this will be geared towards grade 11 students, rising grade 12 students. And we're hoping that this gives you a little bit of information on how to answer questions for yourself and navigate the changing landscape of testing timeline given recent changes. So let's first take a look at some things we'll be looking at today. We'll start by an application overview and look at testing in context, really specifically how testing plays a role in the application process, how it has historically and how it will this year. We'll take a look at SAT and ACT testing requirements and changes as they've happened in the past few months. We'll take a look at SAT-2 subject tests, the role that they play and their level of importance. A brief note on AP exams. We'll come back to timeline, put all the pieces together, and take a look at how these things fit together. We'll spend some time looking at some key takeaways, and then ideally we'll have some time at the end to answer your questions for some Q&A. So before anything else, some deep breaths. Spark Prep has very much been keeping its ear to the ground. We have been a part of and listening to many panels and talks, and we read articles, and we have spoken to many colleagues on all sides of the equation, from high school counselors to college counselors, many of our colleagues in the admissions offices of universities, and in conversation with a lot of thinkers around what is happening right now and how it's impacting students. And by and large, everyone is leading with compassion. So very much some deep breaths. Here are some assurances from colleges really specifically that we'll see. nearly every school, every college has issued a statement like this, right? And I think really importantly, of note, I'm going to read Penn's because I think that this kind of summarizes what a lot of colleges are saying right now. Penn says, schools and districts are making the best decisions they can at this moment in the interest of their students' health and educational experience. We respect and support the decisions schools are making and recognize these decisions are outside of the students' control. We expect students to make the most of the educational opportunities available to them. So we'll keep coming back to these two ideas that many of these things are out of your control. You will not be penalized for anything that is out of your control. And you are encouraged and even maybe expected to make the most of the educational opportunities available to you, but not make the most of opportunities that are not available to you. So by and large, schools are very much leading with compassion, and they are thinking very carefully around decisions that they're making. They're getting a lot of input. There are so many task forces, but they're getting a lot of input from the global health community, the global education community, the national education community, federal guidelines, as well as state specific, right? And sometimes even county specific based by city. So colleges are working with a lot of pieces of information, and they're doing the best that they can to respond to this pretty extraordinary moment. But they are very much leading with compassion for students in the admissions process. With all of that said, let's take a look at testing in context. So what has always been true is testing is one part of this whole picture that is called your application. The United States schools in the United States review applications in what's called a holistic way. What that means is that they're not looking at specific cutoff scores. They're not necessarily asking you to pass some sort of national entrance exam. They're looking really specifically at students' applications. They read every word, they read every test score, they read every grade, they read every letter of recommendation. So generally, some of the things that they're looking for that is unique in many ways to the American education system is they're very much looking for academics, right? They want some demonstration that you are, of how you have done as a high school student. That's really the best indication of how you will perform as a scholar and a student in their community. So we see a lot of emphasis on academics, a lot of emphasis on leadership and character, and an emphasis on growth and values, right? The way that these actually manifest in the application is through your grades and transcripts. That's very important. That looks like if you've made opportunities to take high levels and rigorous courses, how you've done in challenging classes, and by and large, if you've kept your schedule robust and interesting to you. Test scores, which are ideally a way to kind of compare apples to apples across many different school districts and countries and education systems. This includes SAT, ACT, subject tests, and then also testing like AP exams, IB exams, things like that kind of contribute to this test score category. In leadership and character, they're getting letters of recommendation from adults speaking to other adults on the admissions committee about who you are, about the way that you show up in spaces, your level of maturity, whether you are a leader in the classroom, whether you ask really thoughtful questions, if there's additional context about your personal or family life or potentially parts of your personality that are relevant in your application. That shows up in letters of recommendation. Activities. On the actual application, this is a relatively short list. On the Common App, it's 10. You have an opportunity to list 10 things with really just very few characters to describe each of these things. So the work of writing the activities list is not a lot, but the activities list should be a snapshot or a reflection of the things that you have invested time in, the things that you've chosen to do outside of the expectation of grades, outside of the expectation of test scores, outside of even your relationships with teachers and in school and the things that you've done as part of academics? Have you chosen to invest in athletics, in your community, in your intellectual development, in personal development in some way? And so they're looking at activities not as trying to pack your resume, but as a demonstration of who you are as a leader, what kind of character you show, and a reflection of what you value, right? This then brings us into essays and supplements, which really are your opportunity as a student to speak directly to the admissions office. This is where your words get spoken and they read them. And this is your opportunity to be thoughtful, to demonstrate change, to show what you value and how you've grown over time, and why certain experiences are important to you. So as you see, test scores are one piece of this, right? And they have always been just one piece of this. There are no, as I mentioned before, schools do not have, by and large, schools do not have minimum test score requirements for the SAT or ACT. This is an opportunity for students to, the better you do in your ACT or SAT category, the more doors that leaves open, the more competitive you might be as an applicant at any given number of schools, right? And it might make you a more viable candidate at some more competitive schools if you have higher test scores. However, if you don't have a piece of information, right, it doesn't go missing, right? What that means is that the other things have to reflect more about you, right? Admissions officers have to take a look at these other aspects and see, and make some judgments about what that might mean about you as a student, right? So if there are some test scores missing or fewer than we have expected to see in previous years, they will be looking to these other areas to be as full, as complete, and as excellent as possible to demonstrate your capacity. So more on that later. So let's take a look at SAT and ACT testing requirements and how they have shifted this year. The first big question is what will happen with tests. As most of you know, likely, testing has been, SAT and ACT testing internationally, both within the United States and outside of the United States, has been dramatically disrupted this year. There were widespread cancellations for multiple months this spring, when many students typically, especially grade 11 students, typically take these exams. So what does that mean? What's happening? What's the plan moving forward? With the SAT, they're aiming for monthly traditional, meaning like in person, you're sitting there with a paper test with other students, starting in August. They then are aiming for one test date monthly, internationally. But as we see, if you're familiar with the testing schedule, August, October, November, and December have been traditional testing dates, at least domestically. September is the only one they're adding, right? So many test dates have been canceled. They're really only adding one test date, and that's going to be important to understand as we discuss later. So registration for these upcoming tests, College Board has announced that they will contact students, particularly those who had tests canceled, the week of May 26th, to talk about registration. And if testing disruptions are still widespread in the fall, which is a very real possibility, the SAT has indicated that they will make every effort to move the test online, and some sort of at-home online testing option. For the ACT, next test dates are slated for June 12th and 13th and July 17th, 18th, as well as some fall test dates that you'll see later. Registration is May 22nd for the June test date, so that's coming up. So the ACT is already an online, a computer-based test internationally. It will move online domestically this fall. These still happen at testing centers where people are congregating in groups with other people. Whether they make this an at-home option is unclear, but it is likely that they will try to do that if it's not possible for students to safely gather in testing sites. Very importantly, you all, as rising grade 12 students, will be given first priority for registration, ideally, right? That is what they have intended. That's what they've announced that their intention is. They will prioritize grade 12 students, first-time test takers if you do not currently have a test score, and students with fee waivers. So how will these new, if we have kind of like a new online world of testing in the fall, how will they be formatted, administered, evaluated? As is probably obvious, totally unclear. We don't know. Each school, both the College Board and the ACT will make decisions on administration, and each college will make a choice about if or how they're evaluating that new format, how much weight they're giving it, and what that actually means per school. This will likely not be a blanket policy across the board. So similarly, how are colleges planning to use this? These tests for test scores in the next few application cycles, what you can imagine is if there's a lot of uncertainty, they are de-emphasizing test scores and many are turning to test optional. So even for schools that are requiring, I want to emphasize this, even for schools that are requiring the SAT or the ACT still, less emphasis will be placed on those scores. Right? If you have been able to take it once and you can't retake it this fall, they will know that testing was disrupted, and there will be less emphasis placed by and large. But this trend is really interesting. So let's take a look at this trend. So as of this week, here are the test optional schools that have been announced. There are upwards of 1,100, 1,200 schools, colleges, and universities in the United States that have announced that they are test optional or test flexible, that they are de-emphasizing the SAT and the ACT, especially this admission cycle. This particular list is a sample of some of what are considered the 485 plus like top tier schools, right? Ranking is less important here than just knowing that these are like highly accredited institutions and they are de-emphasizing the SAT. Of note are Williams and Amherst, which are two highly competitive and excellent liberal arts colleges. Bowdoin, Wesleyan, Bates. Some of these had already been test optional prior to this year. Many have joined the ranks here. So as you see, there are many, and this list is not comprehensive. This is a partial list. And similarly, national universities, same trend. So of note, we see all the UC school systems. We see Cornell, University of Chicago. This is, again, very much the beginning. Many more schools are likely to follow. There are many schools that are joining this list of test optional or de-emphasizing testing every week. This list is very different than a week ago when I looked. There were many more schools now added. So what does that mean for you? Here are some caveats. Number one is that some schools are test optional just for this admissions cycle, or they're piloting test optional policies. So if you're grade 11, rising grade 12, and if you're considering taking a gap year and potentially testing in the future and not in this academic year and in this calendar year even, some schools to pay attention to, some schools are just going test optional for this cycle at the moment. Many policies are applicable to both domestic and international students, but you must check the school-specific policy for every single school that you're considering, right? So there are every school is having a different policy. Many are applicable to both international and domestic students, but that's not, again, not a blanket policy here. And importantly, if you are a student seeking financial aid, especially an international student seeking financial aid, test scores might still be very important or required for you to be considered for a financial aid package. However, this trend of de-emphasis is very, very real. Test optional is not a trap. By and large, these policies are very sincere. If colleges have made the choice to go test optional, what they are saying is that if you feel this score was reflective of your ability, right, in that moment, then by all means, they want to see it. However, if you don't feel like you had the full opportunity to take a test or to study for a test or to do as well as you think you could have done, then they will look at other parts of your application to try to understand who you are as a student. So policies are sincere and do consider what's the right choice for you. So for grade 11, rising grade 12 students, deep breaths, right? Remember, this is one part of your application and it will be de-emphasized. Whether you submit scores or not, whether you've taken the SAT or not, this is not going to be the most important part of your application this year especially. Colleges know this disruption is real. They know that you'll have fewer opportunities to take the exam. They know there will be very high demand for the fall test dates and that students might not be able to sit for any or as many as they wanted. So what that means is for you, you should expect to only have one opportunity to sit for the exam, especially if you haven't taken it already. So August, September, and October test dates are the only test dates that you'll get back before early application and early decision for the SAT. And then the June, July ACT, obviously, you would get those scores. We would expect to get those scores back before early admit and ED, early action and early decision deadlines. If the test goes online, it will look very different, right? And that is something where that might be harder to prepare for, and that might be something that, again, colleges will know that you don't have the same kind of heads up about expectations of what the test will look like, if that's the case. So should I still prepare? If I'm a grade 11, rising grade 12 student, there's a bunch of things to consider. Look at your resources, your school list, your priorities. Do you already have like a good-ish score, right? If you have like a good-ish score, even if you were hoping to retake, maybe you're done. If you look at your school list and all schools are test optional, maybe you don't take it. If you look at your school list and you're looking for financial aid and you want to keep a lot more options open, maybe, right? Long and short of it is if you can, yes, right? The likelihood is very high that you'll have at least one opportunity to take some form of a test before applying this year. So continue to plan to prepare if possible and reasonable for you, right? And this is important, if and only if this is possible and reasonable for you. If you've been studying for many months, be intentional. Make sure you're making progress, right? Be very careful of burnout, especially for students who have been studying for a long time or expecting to take the test in March or May. Be very careful of burnout. And I want to give you full permission to put the test aside for a bit. Pick it up a month or so before your scheduled test date if that's relevant for you, rather than trying to maintain a lot of momentum around something that you've already been involved with for a long time. And importantly, prioritize investing your time in your application this summer and in other areas of your personal development. If you haven't started studying yet, take a mock test, see how of each, both the SAT and the ACT, and see how close you are to a score that you would be interested or comfortable in sending. Decide whether that's a worthwhile investment of your time. And then use this summer, if so, use this summer to familiarize yourself with the tests and do some preparation and prepare. If you cannot take a test, if you can't get a test date, or if you choose not to prioritize the SAT or the ACT for very valid reasons, you will not be penalized by test optional schools. And all other portions of your application will become more important. So we'll take a look at how these pieces, again, fit onto an actual timeline later, but let's take a look at some other components of testing and what might be in your orbit right now in terms of things to consider. So a brief discussion on SAT-2 subject tests. SAT-2 subject tests, for those who don't know, are very different from the SAT. The SAT and the ACT are both considered equally. Previously, they had been a requirement at many universities. They're both kind of epic marathon 4-ish hour tests that are attempting to show kind of like basic mastery of reading skills, reading comprehension skills, grammar and verbal skills, and mathematics, right? Some both qualitative and quantitative assessment. Subject tests are a brief hour-long exam that is really focused on a specific subject, and it's intended to demonstrate a mastery of that subject that really more closely aligns with academic programs, often, not always, but often, and is an attempt to show that I did both really well in my chemistry class academically, and I'm going to take this test in chemistry to show that even internationally and with national averages, I also am very proficient in this thing. And we have seen a big decline from an admissions perspective of their expectations and requirements of students taking subject tests. So 15 years ago, 20 years ago, many schools required 2 subject tests. Now, what we see, and COVID-19 has really advanced this trend, but what we see is you'll only notice 1 dark green square. There is 1 school in all of North America that requires subject tests. This is McGill in Canada. Everything else has moved to recommended, right, where they're not requiring, but if you have the opportunity to take, and you can, like Yale, University of Pennsylvania, Rice, Georgetown is notorious for recommending and really expecting that students take subject tests, Duke's, Harvard, Princeton, Brown. So many schools are still recommending that if you have the opportunity to take a couple, and these are some of the most competitive schools in the United States that not all students are applying to, right? Then you have this set of schools, these white bricks that are considering, right? So if you submit, they'll look at them, right? They'll actually consider, they'll review that as part of your application. They're not requiring, they're not even recommending. If you've taken them, they'll consider them as part of your application. And those, that's a lot of the UC schools, NYU, Columbia, Bucknell, Boston University, Bowdoin, etc. Then you have all of these red schools that have dropped this requirement, right? And what that often means is, for many of these schools, it means that they're subject test blind. They will not look at subject test scores. Notably, that is Tufts, that is Harvey Mudd, that is MIT, that is Williams College, Colgate. So really substantial schools that typically and in previous years had required subject tests this year are no longer, they have dropped that requirement altogether. So as I've noted, we've really seen this downward trend over the past 15 years that has been expedited by the pandemic. Even top engineering schools, right? So for students who are potentially interested in engineering, even top engineering schools like Cornell, Harvey Mudd, MIT, and others have now, as of this year, and we're planning on anyway, dropping subject tests. They're now subject test blind, right? What they have found is that rigorous academic coursework is way more predictive of success in college than these hour-long tests that don't always even match academic content of what students are doing, right? So what an admissions officer from Cornell was naming recently is that they have found that by and large, the highest level math class that you can take, that is available at your school and that you can take at your school, having exposure to that and choosing to take that highest level of pre-calculus, calculus course in math is way more predictive of success in engineering than subject tests, and even than potentially other science classes that you'll have taken. So they can still serve a function, right? Subject tests still exist. They're still potentially a viable option for you. They can demonstrate mastery of a subject potentially. They can be a differentiator for you, right? If a lot of other students are not taking subject tests and you choose to, if that makes sense for you, they can be a differentiator for you. But if they're not required, really only consider submitting if the scores are excellent, right? So if schools are no longer requiring subject tests, then you really shouldn't be submitting scores if they're under 700, ideally above 750. That is demonstrating mastery. If you have kind of a score in the 500s, that is neutral or potentially even negative for your application, and certainly won't be a boon or a differentiator or demonstrating mastery. So you really only want to submit these scores if they're excellent. So, but can mastery be demonstrated in other ways? If this trend is de-emphasized, can we demonstrate mastery of that thing that you want to demonstrate mastery of in other ways? Are there ways for, if you are a lover of chemistry or a lover of literature, can you demonstrate that mastery or that interest in deeper or more unique ways? Consider priorities and allocation of time. And really only consider preparing for subject tests after you have a strong SAT, ACT score that you are happy with, and your diagnostic score is strong enough to start to warrant some investment of effort, right? So again, if your diagnostic score is in the 300s, 400s, 500s, you want to consider how much effort and studying would be necessary for you to get up to this really excellent range in order to even submit. If your diagnostic scores are pretty low, or if you haven't completed your SAT or ACT, subject test should not be your priority. A brief note on AP exams. So this is relevant for students. If you are in the thick of AP exams, you very much know that AP exams are upon us now. This is representative, I think, of a lot of changes that we've seen. And so I want to note, even if you are not taking AP exams now, a quick note is that these are some of the ways that the College Board, which is the same company that administers SAT and SAT subject tests, here's how they've adapted the AP exams. The exam format, rather than being 4-ish hours, is now 45 minutes at home online. There are significantly inconvenient testing times for time zones outside of the United States. So as any student who is in Indochina time knows, the AP testing times that they have are in the middle of the night for students. Unstable internet connections are a thing. Potentially students have loud home environments. Testing glitches have been reported in these first couple of days of exams. And all of that is really stressful, right? But context is everything, right? No need to stress. Colleges know that these circumstances are very variable for students. And they also know that this is not necessarily the same test again that was administered last year. There are questions of administration, of security, of students' even ability to submit tests or to take it. Many students are choosing not to take it because it's not reasonable for their health or well-being to take a test in the middle of the night. So no need to stress. Colleges know that this is, they both know that this is happening, and there will be an opportunity in your application to contextualize your experience, right? Schools get what's called a secondary score report from your high school, which is an opportunity for high schools to give context around the circumstances of grades, of opportunities, of whether they ended up going for letter grades or pass-fail this semester. So context is everything. There will likely be an opportunity for that to come through in your secondary score report or your counselor letters, or you might have an opportunity to be explicit about what your circumstances were and why you made the choices or why you got the scores that you did. So the exams themselves will not be evaluated heavily, if at all. The level of the course rigor has always been, and again, is even more important this year. Your choice to take a difficult course and specifically your grades before the course are going to be most heavily considered. So schools themselves, colleges, will decide whether to award credit. Once students get in, we'll decide whether to award credit for passing scores of this year on a school-by-school basis. That again will not be a blanket policy. If you do choose to take the exams, utilize College Board's course resources. They have many videos and course materials to help students study during disruptive times. And if your test is, end of next week, for instance, start modifying your sleep schedule now so that you can be as alert and awake as possible during your testing time. Push back your sleep by 15, 30 minutes every night. Then after the exam is done, you'll want to bring it back to a place that's healthy for you. Importantly, it's totally fine if you choose not to take AP exams this year, especially if it's causing undue stress. There will be an opportunity to contextualize that experience, and colleges are de-emphasizing the exams themselves this year in the application process. Okay, so that was a ton of information. Let's talk about then how, what testing options we have and how you might organize your next few months. So first, let's take a look at just the scheduled test dates for the upcoming year or two. So for grade 11, rising grade 12 students, if you're planning on applying this application cycle, this chart on the left is most relevant for you, right? What we see is, again, we have August, September, October, and December test dates internationally. And we see that the September test date does not have subject tests available, right? So because these administrations are for both the SAT and the SAT2, if you're planning on taking both, if you can get a seat and a test date for both, you'll want to be really mindful of just planning and prioritizing. When are you studying for which? Is it worthwhile for you to split up your time in that way? And again, always double check whether your subject test is available. Some subject tests are only available. Sometimes they're not available in a given test date. World history has some exceptions, and a lot of languages, foreign languages, aside from Spanish and French, a lot of foreign languages are only offered once a year. So potentially those test dates have passed. If you didn't have an opportunity to take those subject tests, that's okay. So taking a look at August, September, October, and December as your available test dates for this application cycle. And if you are planning on applying potentially next cycle, presumably test dates will resume to March, May, August, October, December for next cycle. For ACT, scheduled test dates, as we noted, there's a June, July, 2 June, July options. You'll see that these are testing windows, testing weekends, because the ACT has moved online. They have different testing windows over the course of a few days. And the fact that this is a computer-based test means that they might have more flexibility to stagger students' timing and safely test them. Scores do come back quicker. So it's unclear whether these will be as prone to cancellation as like the in-person paper tests of the SAT, potentially, but there might be ways that the ACT can stagger student times in a way that's safer. And then we have September, October, and December test dates for this cycle. Again, October will be the last test date before early action and early decision deadlines. So we're now in May, right? We're mid-May. You all are likely involved in your grade 11 academics. Strong school performance, especially if your school is still awarding pass-fail or grades, is particularly important. Now is a great time to be investing in personal development projects, thinking about what you're interested in, what you want to pursue. Begin college research and personal statement ideas, essay ideas. And if you haven't already, take a diagnostic test of an SAT and an ACT and potentially start some prep if you're planning on fall test dates. In June, many of you will still be in school, so strong academics will continue to be the priority. Personal development projects will continue to be the priority. Personal statement work, actually writing essays and personal statement work, beginning your supplemental essays will be a priority in June. In July, many of you will still be in school, so you'll finish grade 11 strong. Personal development projects should continue, and personal statement and supplement essay writing should continue to be a priority. And you, if you have put aside your SAT prep, you'll want to restart your SAT prep probably in July if you're aiming for the August or October test dates. August, grade 11 begins for many. Personal development projects continued. You want to really complete strong drafts of all of your applications and essays by August so that you can prioritize your academics as you move into fall of grade 12. Potentially continue SAT prep. And if you have a seat, SAT 1, taking the SAT on August 29th. In September, October, we're looking at, again, strong academics being a priority, personal development projects being a priority. There is a seat to take SAT 1 only in September, end of September. And then potentially this is a time to pivot to studying for any SAT 2 subject tests. If you've taken a test in August and do want to pivot to some subject tests, these are some good weeks to prepare for SAT subject tests, which would be offered October 3rd. And then November, December, you're looking at grade 12 continues, EA/ED deadlines happen around November 1st for most schools. RD deadlines happen around January 1st for most schools. And potentially you'll want to retake if you can. Again, we won't expect that this is a given, but if you can and you want to potentially retake SAT 1 for regular decision if needed on December 5th. So this is just highlighting kind of some of the key test prep moments, right? So if you haven't yet started prep and you are like, okay, now's my time, take a diagnostic test, pick a test, start to prepare. Use the summer to lightly prep and aim to take the test if you can get a seat August 29th or September 26th ideally, so that you can put that aside, focus on school, focus on your applications. If you've already started preparing and you've been preparing and you just need a test date, potentially consider putting it aside, restart SAT prep over the summer whenever is relevant for you, and then plan to take again the test as soon as you can so that you can get a test score and be done. For the ACT, what does that look like? So similarly, academics, personal development projects will continue to be a priority. If you have a seat for June or July, you'll want to be starting to prepare now-ish, right? Picking prep back up if you've put it aside. And if you haven't started preparing, taking a diagnostic test, you might have an opportunity to take June 12th and 13th. That's in about a month, right? So that is a possibility for you to take that early if that test date stays. Similarly, there's a test date in July. And if you've taken ACT June or July and you are done with that test, then you could potentially pivot to SAT 2 subject tests. August, completing strong drafts, academics, continue ACT prep, subject tests on August 29th, which would give you kind of an additional month or so to move on and focus on academics, applications, et cetera. And again, we see testing dates in September and or October, with the possibility of taking subject tests on October 3rd, and same deadlines, retaking ACT for RD deadlines in December if needed and if possible. So again, we see if you have a seat for July or June, you are probably in the midst of preparation now and then likely will be done with those in June or July. If you haven't yet started, you'll take a diagnostic test, probably start and continue ACT prep mid-summer to prepare for the September and October tests. You may or may not lace in SAT subject tests aiming for either August or October. So some key takeaways. What we know is that schools, colleges are leading with flexibility and compassion. This is not in a vacuum. They know you don't have control over many of these things, and they will very much take these things into consideration. Prioritize taking the SAT or the ACT over SAT 2 subject tests. You also do not need to take both the SAT and the ACT. If you can get one sitting for either of those tests, that will still keep doors open for you. SAT and ACT testing will be given less emphasis across the board, whether a school goes test optional or not this year. So there are very valid reasons to choose not to continue to prepare for the SAT or ACT. And if you can take the SAT or ACT at least once this summer and fall, you should do so. That'll keep your options open. Context, context, context will continue to be key across the board. So take advantage of the resources available to you. You'll not be penalized for resources that you don't have access to. If you have the opportunity to take an SAT or ACT, do so. If you live in a region and it's hard to get to, or you weren't able to get a test date, you won't be penalized for those barriers. And I think one of the big things, the reason we started with looking at the whole application picture in context, the whole pie of admissions and what will be assessed, is use this as an opportunity, right? This is a challenging time. Use this as an opportunity to make choices about what you can and want to prioritize. You can make a case for why those choices made sense for you, right? If you've chosen to put a lot of things aside and focus on helping out with a sibling, right? Helping out with a neighbor across the hall. They don't need to look like traditional things on what may have been your resume a couple years ago or someone else's resume a couple years ago. If you've chosen to start and pick up a musical instrument, or to start taking courses on forensic psychology because that's an interest of you, you can make a case as to why that made sense for you right now to choose to prioritize those things over others. And if you have an internet connection, the world is your oyster right now. There are so many resources available. This is one of the I think silver linings about this time, is that with so much online and with so much that has moved online, many students have access to many more things that they didn't previously. Again, use the internet and resources you have to engage with your community, with your intellect, with the world, with yourself. Get creative about how those things might look. Again, it might not look like an internship that you had lined up, or a summer program that you had lined up for the summer, but are there still ways that you can gain that skill, do that culinary program from your kitchen rather than traveling, or rather than being part of a specific program? Can you still make meaningful connections? Can you do a social science research project and interview a bunch of people from your family about your family history? Get creative around how these things might look for you. And I think another way to say that is this is an opportunity for some soul searching of what you are interested in, what you're curious about, rather than this like checkbox syndrome and productivity theater of making it look like you're really busy and engaged. How do you want to be busy and engaged? This is a great moment to consider that. So there will continue to be dramatic amounts of uncertainty as the situation continues to evolve. So stay tuned for changes and information from all the places, the SAT, ACT, their official announcements. They will be in direct communication with you if test dates are changing, or if circumstances are changing. From colleges, sign up for colleges, sign up for virtual tours, many things like that. Start to do those things now. But colleges specifically are really trying to be proactive in communication about how this upcoming fall and future years will look, about their admissions processes. And I think the note that feels important for me to continue to emphasize right now is just for an invitation for all of us to lead with compassion, right? Compassion for self around what your limits are, what you are motivated to take on. Compassion for people making very difficult decisions about health, education, finances for these schools. And understand that by and large, people are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have available to them, and that's all that's expected of you as well. So we have a little bit of time left for Q&A. So if you have not done so already, please take a moment and type in your questions into the Q&A box or into the chat, and our team will sift through those, and we'll give some time for questions and answers. Okay, there was a question that says, how do I improve my vocabulary for the SAT? Can you recommend some books for reading self-study? So That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So if you, maybe now more so than ever, right? Drilling SAT vocab words has never been Spark Prep's recommendation. We teach a lot of strategy and how to approach kind of like connotation of words, roots of words, and practicing what words sound like in context, if you're familiar with the sound of words, as tools to help you understand words in context. So there are certain questions that ask about word in context. If you find that, that your vocabulary is prohibiting you from understanding like the reading comprehension or even the English sections, the biggest way to improve vocabulary is just to do more reading in English and to do more speaking in English. So that's a little bit less like SAT specific and a little bit more just kind of improving your English proficiency generally. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend any specific like vocab drilling, especially now, right? That might not be the best use of your time. Continue to read broadly. And in terms of SAT materials, there are a lot of things available online. There are, Khan Academy is partners with the College Board, and those resources are free, and they have a lot of resources for reading and otherwise. Really any test prep book, Princeton Review, Kaplan, McGraw-Hill, all of those are just exposure, and exposure is really the biggest thing to help you improve with reading comprehension and vocabulary. Let me take a look. There's a student who asked, currently in grade 11, have just prepared for SAT exams. What will be the best way for me to prepare for both math and reading exam in about 5 months? Would you mind clarifying, do you mean math and reading on the SAT specifically? Do you mean how to prepare for the SAT, or do you mean a different math and reading exam? If you would mind clarifying, that would be great. So on the SAT, right, if you have been preparing, you might want to put it aside, right? If you feel like you have a long way to go and you are planning on taking the test in August or September or October, the best way is exposure. Spark Prep offers free mock tests. Come take a mock test with us. We have classes that are just ramping up if you are interested in group classes. We and a lot of other centers have group classes for SAT, so that is a really great way to get some more targeted. What you want to look for are programs that give you targeted strategy, a lot of exposure, and some very clear benchmarks for what you're doing, right? How to actually practice in context. If you're doing self-studying, take mock tests, be really diligent about error analysis. Why did you get a question wrong? And be relentless, right? These are standardized tests. There's exactly one right answer. Did you get that math question wrong because of content? Do you need a refresher on quadratic equations? If so, go back, do a lesson, look online for quadratic equations, or go back to your math notes from this year or last, and remind yourself of the things that are relevant for quadratic equations. If you're like, oh, I knew this content, I just didn't read the question right. Cool, make a plan. How can you never make that mistake again? Be relentless about avoiding those mistakes. For reading, you want to play with your strategy, right? Give yourself a set of experiments. And again, work through it. If you're not in a class, if you can't take a class with Spark Prep or another center, get a book. If you can't get a book, do get some practice tests online, search SAT practice tests online. And as much as possible, you want to look for previously administered exams. Those are kind of the best. The official College Board resources are going to be the closest to what you should expect to see. And play with your strategy, right? Does it work for you to read really carefully and annotate? Does that help you answer the questions more quickly? Or does it help for you to kind of do a quicker read and a skim, focusing on introduction and conclusion, and then going back and looking every single time in the passage for your answer? I won't get too far in the weeds, but because I can talk about this for a long time, but the reading section of the SAT and the ACT are open book tests, right? All of your answers are right there. Stay confined to the passage. Go back and look every single time for a question. If you can't find the answer to the question, look again, spend more time, look again, right? Especially as you're practicing, get in the habit of finding the answers quickly. You're not producing any new content, you're finding. All you're doing is you're finding, right? So that's kind of my biggest tip for reading is stay really confined to the passage. What do they explicitly say? The most direct answer that's stated in the passage is the one that's correct. Thank you for your question. There is another question that's asking about if IB program is SAT or AP as important. So IB is definitely a more robust program than the SAT for sure. They're not necessarily a direct replacement for each other. So if you are in an IB program, IB also has had some disruptions, but IB has done, the IB program has done their work to try to provide colleges with the information that colleges need to assess students' academic progress. Ideally, if you can still take the SAT, take the SAT if you're in an IB program. Typically, IB and AP are two different courses of study. Schools will either be like if you go to an international high school, you might have an IB program. If you go to an American school, a boarding school, or even some other schools might have AP programs. Both are like proficiency levels, and AP is really talking about giving college credit for high school courses. IB is talking about, again, like a certificate program for courses that you're taking on a pretty rigorous level. So typically students don't take IB and AP, but both students in AP programs and IB programs should have the opportunity to take the SAT or the ACT. So those are not quite stand-ins for each other, but IB and AP are often separate. So there's a question about grades and if a student has mostly B's starting year 11. So there's a question around like still having a chance. There are so many schools, and all schools have different levels of requirements. So there are plenty of schools that you can apply to with mostly B's, and you would be within the range of competitive applicants. And yes, certainly if you don't feel like your GPA and your grades are particularly high, then getting a higher score on testing might be a boon to your application, right? That might be a way to demonstrate some mastery and proficiency. However, again, it really depends on every school, right? I strongly encourage you to do school research. Take a look at schools where where like a target student has your GPA, right? What schools are you a competitive applicant for? What schools are you a moderate applicant for? What schools would be reach schools for you, right? If you have gotten mostly B's on your transcript, probably the highest levels of competitive schools aren't necessarily going to be worth your investment of time to apply to, but there are still some competitive and moderately competitive schools that where mostly B's are still like you would be a competitive applicant at those schools. And if you don't feel like your GPA is doing justice, then your activities, right, getting engaged in your community and your intellect, really demonstrating a lot of community engagement, and your essays, all of those other things need to be particularly excellent in order for you to be as competitive of an applicant as you want. But there are so many schools in the United States, and there's not a GPA cutoff for all schools in the United States. There's not a test score cutoff. You want to think about all of these pieces in concert with each other. And if one is a little weaker, then yeah, you want to try to make the other areas stronger. That those will be the stronger areas of your application. Also, if you're still in grade 11, do your best to try to finish this year strong. Do your best to make grade 12 the best semester or quarter that you've had, right? That'll show kind of an upward trajectory for schools. Great. So any last questions that I can answer for students? I'd like just to take a moment to say, please take just 30 seconds to fill out our, there's a quick webinar survey at the end of this that that Ming Chang just posted in to all attendees. That'll give us a sense of what content you want to see in the future and where, what felt helpful, what didn't, and what we can provide to give you more content in the future. And please sign up for a free consultation with our admissions expert, Zoe. So that form will allow you to sign up for a consultation that you can talk to her about your specific context, and we can give you a lot more advice and information about potentially your trajectory. So please help us improve future webinars, sign up, don't be a stranger, contact us via Facebook, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. And great, thanks all.